Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Will Engelhart. I'm a Senior Training and Technical Assistance Manager with the Urban Institute. Thank you so much for joining us today to hear more about the Upward Mobility Framework and our recent release of the data tables. For this session titled Using the Urban Institute's Upward Mobility Data Tables in Your Jurisdiction. This session will provide an overview of the main components of the Urban Institute's Upward Mobility Framework and provide an interactive training on how to understand and apply the recently released mobility metrics data tables, which should be available for every county in more than 450 cities in the United States. We'll have several speakers who will discuss how to apply the data tables to support local efforts to increase upward mobility and reduce racial inequities, and they will give examples of how these metrics have been used to create changes in specific communities and communities across the country. First, we'll hear from my colleague, Becca Dietert, who will provide an overview of the Upward Mobility Framework broadly. Next, we'll hear from additional colleagues, Tina Chilidze and Claudia Solari, who will provide an interactive demonstration on how to use the table. For that section, please come ready to go to our website and peruse the data. Hopefully you'll be able to do so yourself, but there will be detailed instructions on how to access that and utilize it. Then you'll have a chance to hear from Joanne Nelson from Boone County, Missouri, who will be providing examples of how Boone County has used tools from the Upward Mobility Framework in practice in their specific community. You'll have some opportunities to ask questions and we'll provide answers along the way. Finally, we'll wrap with some next steps for the Upward Mobility Project and ways to move forward and engage with us in the coming months and years. Before I move on, I'd just like to go over a couple housekeeping items. So this event, as you'll see, is being recorded, and then the recording will be posted online afterwards for us to use on our website at urban.org. We've enabled closed captioning, as you can see. You can adjust the settings with the Show Hide Captions button. Speaker biographies will also be available online. And as you probably noted, all participants are muted, but you can type questions and comments specifically for our Q&A sections in the Q&A box at any time. And then finally, at the end, we'll ask you to complete a brief survey if you could. And you'll see at the bottom there, hashtag #LiveAtUrban, which you can use for social media and online. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to Becca to walk through the Upward Mobility Framework. Becca?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Dietert. I'm a policy analyst in the Research to Action Lab at the Urban Institute. And today I'm excited to share an overview of the Upward Mobility Framework with you all before we dive into the newly released data tables. In the next few minutes, I'll tell you about how the framework was designed to support local leaders to boost upward mobility and increase equity through data, community engagement, cross-sector partnerships, and policy and program analysis. When I'm finished, I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Tina and Claudia, who will talk about how to access mobility metrics for your community. In recent decades, rates of economic mobility in the US have stagnated, casting doubt on the American dream that people can do better than their parents and achieve security and success. Mobility from poverty has too often been viewed only as a matter of individual ability and hard work, but people experiencing poverty face a web of obstacles that often undermine their best efforts. Racial prejudice, discrimination, and segregation have created especially persistent and systemic barriers to upward mobility for people of color. Public policies and institutional practices have created and sustained profound racial inequities and injustice, as well as disadvantages for other marginalized groups. And the COVID-19 pandemic has further laid bare the structural inequities in the conditions that affect the health, security, and opportunity of individuals and families. While it can take decades to measure generational mobility, research shows that a range of important factors influence mobility in the short and medium term, and that local leaders can create and bolster the conditions that boost upward mobility and narrow racial and ethnic inequities for children, youth, and adults. But to build public will and achieve meaningful progress, communities need actionable metrics they can use to assess current conditions and monitor their progress. Our Upward Mobility Framework project provides local leaders these metrics and various tools to support local planning. The Upward Mobility Framework builds on a previous effort led by the Urban Institute. the US Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, which started by asking the question, what would it take to dramatically increase upward mobility from poverty? Among the many contributions of that group, they argued that mobility is about more than just economic success. True upward mobility requires that people have power and autonomy and a sense of being valued by their community. This broader conception of mobility, which we refer to as the three-part definition, drives our work. In 2019, we partnered with a cross-disciplinary working group of scholars who systematically reviewed factors that influence mobility from poverty and reached a broad consensus on a framework of predictors and metrics supported by strong evidence that can be influenced by local and state policies. This framework was also informed by a series of broader vetting sessions that engaged hundreds of stakeholders from the nonprofit, government, business, and philanthropic sectors, among others. I'll walk through each component of the upward mobility framework and the suite of mobility metrics to help you understand what these mean and how they fit together. Here is a visual of the upward mobility framework. You'll see at the top, there is upward mobility from poverty because that is, of course, our primary and driving goal. Every part of the framework below that is a structural support for this goal. So let's get into each of those structures. We start with the interconnected three-part definition of mobility from poverty. Economic success, power and autonomy, and dignity and belonging are the three components that holistically represent upward mobility. Supporting mobility from poverty are 5 essential pillars. The first pillar is opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods, because neighborhoods play a central role in supporting family stability and well-being, their access to social and economic opportunities, and their children's chances to thrive and succeed. Next is high-quality education. From preschool through post-secondary, education provides a crucial avenue to economic and social mobility. Rewarding work. Jobs and wages constitute the primary source of income and economic security for most people in the US today. Next, healthy environment and access to good health care, because good and stable health helps people of all ages surmount life's challenges, excel in school and on the job, ensure their family's well-being, and fully participate in their communities. Our last pillar is responsive and just governance, attentive to the needs of all community members and residents who are engaged in decision-making, are hallmarks of a community that supports upward mobility. Across the pillars is a key foundation: ensure equitable access for all, including people of color and other marginalized groups. Combating persistent racial inequities across the pillars is essential to achieving upward mobility in our communities. So this emphasis on racial equity is highlighted across all elements of the framework. Under each pillar is a set of key predictors of mobility from poverty. These evidence-based factors are strongly associated with the likelihood that a community can create conditions to boost the economic and social mobility of its residents, while narrowing racial and ethnic inequities. The predictors were chosen by the working group after a rigorous and thorough review of the academic research around factors that most strongly influence mobility from poverty. These 24 predictors cover diverse aspects of community and can be influenced by state and local policies. Each predictor is represented by one or more metrics to compare and monitor a community's performance over time, what we call the mobility metrics. No data source is perfect, but we aim to select metrics that best balance a variety of considerations. We encourage you to review the Upward Mobility Framework, which is discussed in our report called Boosting Upward Mobility, Metrics to Inform Local Action, 2nd edition, available on our website. The report also goes into more depth about how the components of the framework were developed. But the selected mobility metrics are our way to take an aspect of the predictor and make it actionable. For example, environmental quality can encompass many things, but we offer a metric on air quality that a community can use to see what that value is in their own community, and see how it differs for areas of different majority racial or ethnic groups. Disparities in air quality can be a signal that other environmental quality disparities exist within your community. The metrics can serve as tools to compare your values to peer communities, reveal potential structural barriers that might contribute to racial inequities, prioritize areas of action that can have the greatest local impact, highlight interconnections among predictors from various policy areas to engage the right partners, set targets for improving conditions over time, and monitor progress. As part of a process to test the utility of the framework and the mobility metrics for local decision makers, we partnered with a set of 8 county governments, our upward mobility cohort, to assess how the metrics could inform a process to develop cross-sector mobility action plans that lay out local short and medium-term strategies for improving mobility and equity. This partnership recognized that the mobility metrics themselves are a crucial starting point, but that the deep work of creating local strategies to boost mobility and equity take a lot more than data. Successful changes require coalition building with cross-sector partners across policy domains, deep and meaningful community engagement, and the addition of local data and knowledge to provide a full and nuanced understanding of the conditions in a given community. After a huge amount of work last summer, each county released a mobility action plan in which they outlined a series of strategic actions designed to systematically target and improve the community level supports of upward mobility from poverty. Later, we'll be hearing from Joanne Nelson, Community Services Program Manager for Boone County, about how her team engaged in this process. We learned a lot from the counties, and their feedback helped refine the framework you see today. Our partnership also led Urban to create a planning guide to help local leaders undertake similar mobility action planning processes in their own communities. Informed by best practices drawn from the cohort counties and from research on systems change and evidence-based decision-making, the guide helps local leaders better understand impediments to upward mobility and how to build a cross-sector team that can plan, advocate for, and implement a set of systems changes focused on bringing all members of your community out of poverty and creating more equitable outcomes. We'll close the overview there, but please visit our website to access the planning guide, links to the mobility action plans of our cohort, and other information. I'll pass this off to our colleagues, Tina and Claudia, for more context around the metrics and a demonstration of the data table. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. I'm Tina Chalidze, a policy associate in our Research to Action lab. So before we dive into the tables themselves, let's revisit how the mobility metrics themselves were chosen. As we mentioned earlier, several metrics could represent each of the predictors, but we were charged with choosing a concise number. So we developed 6 criteria that we wanted the metrics to ideally meet. The first of these was that the metric had to be valid, meaning that it was well established or accepted in research and policy, and that it's an accurate measure of the predictor that it's representing. Next, it had to be widely available, meaning that it draws upon existing and accessible data for communities nationwide. Then it had to be repeated at regular intervals, meaning that it's routinely measured to allow for effective monitoring and to signal the potential effects of policy interventions over time. They also had to be geographically mindful, meaning that the metric is available at the city or county level and is less sensitive to resident turnover. It also had to be consistent across time and geography. This means that the metric ensures meaningful tracking and allows for clear comparison within and across localities. They also had to be structurally relevant. This meant that the metric would help identify a systemic condition rather than an individual level outcome. And lastly, we wanted the metrics as much as possible to be structurally equitable and inclusive of important subgroups, meaning that the metric would help identify structural equity in the community, acknowledging that people experience poverty and upward mobility differently. We ask of the metric, can this be disaggregated by race or ethnicity, or by another characteristic that can help distinguish groups of privilege from those of disadvantage? So some of these criteria were more essential than others, but we did our best to have the metrics meet as many of the criteria as possible. Along with these criteria, we tried to ensure that the measurements minimized any overlap between the metrics. For example, the financial security metric focuses on debt, while the opportunities for income metric focuses specifically on earned income. So let's move on to understanding the data tables. We have a suite of 26 mobility metrics that represent the 24 predictors of the upward mobility framework that Becca outlined for you. Last month, we made the most recently available mobility metrics data public on our website for anyone to access and download. The metrics are organized into data tables that can be accessed at the county or at the city level. So we have mobility metrics data available for all 3,143 counties across the US and for 482 cities. Now, we use the term city to refer specifically to census places that have a population of 75,000 or greater within its jurisdiction. So unfortunately, for places with smaller populations, many of the data sources that comprise the mobility metrics are not available with enough accuracy. So for those of you that live in a city with a population that's smaller than the 75,000 cutoff, we suggest looking at the data tables for the county that your city falls within. So these data tables can be viewed online, they can be shared with others using a link, they can be saved, they can be printed. And now we'll walk you through how to access the data specifically. So when you visit the Upward Mobility website and click the middle tab in the header that says data, it will take you to our data landing page, which should look just like this, with the header reading, Measuring Upward Mobility in Counties and Cities Across the US. On this page, there's a link at the bottom of the introductory text that will bring you to this short video tutorial, which you can watch to remind yourself about the framework and how to navigate the data tables after this webinar and beyond. You'll then scroll down to where it says, select a county or city to explore your community's mobility metrics. And the first step is for you to decide which type of geography makes the most sense for your needs. You might ask yourself, what jurisdiction is the one where I have the most influence? Or which policies at what level of geography most impact me and my work in the community? So with that answer in mind, you then select which state you're in. And then from there, you select your county or city. And you can type your location in the text bar directly, or just scroll through the list of available options, which will pop up when you click. Once you select yours, a button will show up that says View Data Tables in blue. Click that. The data tables will appear in a new tab on your browser. If you want to compare what your community's metric values are with another comparable community, you can return to the data page and select a different jurisdiction. Because the data tables will automatically pop up into a new tab on your browser, you can open several and toggle between the communities to compare the values across all the communities that you want. You can also hit Reset Data Table Selection to clear your selections and start fresh if you're staying within the same tab. As this web page is new, we would love for you to share feedback with us. And you can do that directly on the website by clicking that yellow tab to the right of the screen. So now we're going to walk you through the data tables for a mock community, and we would love for all of you on this call to follow along for your own community of interest. We have just shared a link to the data landing page in the chat, and we'll give you a moment to click that link and scroll down and navigate to a community's data tables that you can follow along with. And also, for those of you who have already done so or are quick with it, please send us a little thumbs up reaction on Zoom so we can get a sense of how many people are following along. And with that, I'll pass this to Claudia for the live demonstration.
Great, thanks, Tina. I'm Claudia Solari, a Senior Research Associate in the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center. I'll walk you through a mock community we call Upward County in the State of Mobility, or MB. Please follow along for your own community because I'll ask you some questions about what you're seeing along the way. In the upper left, you'll see a navigation tool with each pillar from the Upward Mobility Framework that Becca presented earlier. This can help you jump to the right section of this long page of tables. As you scroll down, you can see each predictor and the corresponding metric for that predictor. So for example, we can go to the rewarding work pillar. We can select the financial security predictor, and the metric says it is the share with debt in collections. You can see at the top that we have 3 tabs, and the tables default to the first tab, which is summary. This is meant to give you quick access to your metric values for the most recent year. Each metric has a data quality index designed to offer you a sense of reliability of the values presented. The data source is also offered so you know the year of the data and the sources we used. The Detailed tab offers table notes that gives more information on how to understand the metric. It also adds more rows of data based on confidence intervals if those are available. Note that not all metrics have all 3 tabs, but this one does. So let's check that out. The More Data tab is where we offer subgroup information if that's available. In most cases, this is by race and ethnicity. It also provides up to 2 years of data. To better understand the data quality and other technical components, you can go back to the navigation and select additional notes on data. This is where we offer a broad definition of the data quality values, which are either strong, marginal, weak, or NA. And just to be clear, this is not an assessment of whether the value of the metric is performing good or bad in your community. Rather, it relates to the accuracy of the estimates that we calculated. This section also offers other general notes about confidence intervals and missing values. So we know this is a lot of information, but you can right-click your mouse anywhere on the screen, so you can hit print and save these tables as a PDF. For more information about the metrics, you can also go up to the top and click the Description tab. The text here informs you about how each metric performs based on the selection criteria Tina mentioned earlier. It also includes the strengths and limitations of each metric. We discuss the criteria and other factors in more detail in our reports and on our methodology page on our website. And you'll see that by clicking the name of the predictor, it directs you to our website's evidence resource library that highlights key literature around that predictor. And these are available for the 24 predictors selected for the framework, as well as nearly 30 other additional predictors that we had considered. Okay. So let's look at some specific mobility metrics in this data table as an example of how to better understand the data. Let's start with the opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods pillar and select the housing stability predictor. The metric for this is the number and share of public school children who are ever homeless during the school year. If you select the Detail tab, you can see several notes, and this is where we define what we mean by homeless. And it says there it's when a student's primary nighttime residence at any time during the school year was a shelter, transitional housing, or they were awaiting foster care placement. It's if they were living in unsheltered locations, in a hotel or motel because of the lack of alternative adequate accommodations, or in a housing of other people because of the loss of housing, economic hardship, or for a similar reason. And this comes from the US Department of Education. So for Upward County, you can see in the table that it reports 852 public school children were experiencing homelessness in the 2019 to 2020 school year. For any metric, it's helpful to go to the More Data tab. Here you can see how that value has changed over time. You can see in Upward County, the number of homeless students declined from 2018 to 2019, which is from 1,189 to the 852, or from 4.8% of all students to 3.4% of all students. And if you've been following along and accessing the data tables for your own community, go ahead and scroll to this metric. We'll give everyone a few seconds to find it, and then we'll ask you all a poll question that should pop up on your screen. And that poll question will read, when looking at the number of homeless students for your community, is this number surprising to you? Great, keep your answers rolling in. Once we've hit critical mass, you'll be able to see the results of this. Great. So it looks like about 26% of you, when looking at these numbers, were surprised by them. Just over half of you weren't surprised, and another 21% weren't quite sure what to expect from this. All right, let's jump to another example. So under the same pillar, let's go ahead and select the racial diversity predictor. The metric for this predictor is the index of people's exposure to neighbors of different races and ethnicities. This is a metric where the comparison by race and ethnicity are an essential component to the construction of the metric overall. If you select the Detail tab, you can see that it offers you more context in the interpretation of the metrics. So it reads, this is a type of exposure index. For example, a value of 90% in the percent for Black non-Hispanic row means that the average Black non-Hispanic resident has 90% of their neighbors within a census tract who are of a different race or ethnicity than themselves. So the higher the value, the more exposed to people of different races and ethnicities. In Upward County, you'll see that the table reports 36.2% Black Hispanic residents that are exposed to neighbors of a different race or ethnicity, which is similar to the value for white non-Hispanic residents. You can also see that 77.3% of Hispanic residents are exposed to neighbors of other races and ethnicities. Now, these differences aren't inherently good or bad, but the question is whether these neighborhoods have equal access to resources and opportunity. If we want to know more about this metric, you can select the description tab up top, or a shortcut is to visit here. And it brings you to the description page where it describes the racial diversity particular in detail. It says higher values of the index indicate more neighborhood diversity and more day-to-day exposure of people to neighbors of different races and ethnicities. To examine the evidence explaining how this is linked to upward mobility, again, you can click here and it'll take you to the evidence resource library. Let's go back and click on the More Data tab. Here, again, you can see how this value has changed over time. Let's take a look at another example. Let's go to the healthy environment and access to good health care pillar and select the neonatal health predictor. The metric here is share with low birth weight, and you can see that it comes from the CDC. Let's select the Detail tab, and in the notes, you can see that really what we're talking about is the share of babies born weighing less than 5 pounds, 8 ounces out of all births within available birth weight information. For Upward County, you can see that the table reports that 11.5% of babies in Upward County are born with low birth weight. If you're following along in your own data tables and you're in a city, we want to flag that this metric is not available at the city level, and you'll be seeing a message directing you to look at its corresponding county instead. In this Detailed tab, you'll also notice that the metric reports a confidence interval. Now, we're not able to provide confidence intervals for all of the metrics, but it's important to note that within each of these tables, we are showing you calculated estimates and not raw numbers. That means that each number will have some margin of error associated with it. And in this case, we can say with confidence that the true value is somewhere between 10.4% and 12.7% for Upward County. Remember, if you want to know more about this metric, you can again select the description tab, or we'll take that shortcut here. And here it indicates that children born below that weight threshold are at elevated risk for health conditions and infant mortality. Again, if you want to learn more about the literature, click on that predictor name. It'll take you to the evidence resource library. But let's go back and select the More Data tab. Here we can see how the value for the community overall has changed. So you can look at that all row for 2018 and 2020. And as higher percentages of babies with low birth weight signal elevated risk for health conditions and infant mortality, a community might be concerned if their percentages increased over time. And in Upward County, we do see about a 1 percentage point increase between 2018 and 2020. You can also see whether you have disparities in the health of babies by the mother's race and ethnicity. In Upward County, the share of babies with low birth weight is lower for white non-Hispanic mothers than for Black non-Hispanic mothers. Notice the data quality for the race and ethnic groups, as you might have variations in accuracy of the percentages across the groups. You should keep those in mind as you're comparing. When metrics are calculated for smaller subpopulations, the smaller number of observations affects the accuracy of the estimates. If you're looking for even more accurate data, an alternative is to contact your local hospitals and inquire about having them run figures for you based on their local electronic health records. All right, I'm going to prompt for a polling question here. And so if you've been following along in accessing your data tables for your own county, please scroll to this metric. And we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to find that and let you answer the poll question. I'll just go ahead and read that. Upward County has 16.6% low birth weight among Black non-Hispanic mothers, which is higher compared to the 5.6% among white non-Hispanic mothers. When you compare these two values for your community, is this difference higher than you expected, lower than you expected, about what you expected, or did you not know what to expect? All right, thanks everyone for participating. We have over half saw that the difference was about what they expected, but we have about 24% that the value was different than what their expectations were. Right, if your community is looking to develop your own mobility strategy, we have a planning guide on our website with step-by-step guidance that Becca had mentioned. It walks you through the process of what we learned from working with our Upward Mobility cohort, as well as work with other experts. And I encourage you to go ahead and take a look at that. But for the metrics, think of these as one piece of the puzzle to gaining a full picture of your community. This piece can help highlight challenges and trends that warrant further investigation, discussion, and analysis. Of course, the mobility metrics, like any national data sources, are signals of potential areas of strength and concern, but they aren't enough on their own. There will almost always be a nuanced local data source to consider when developing strategies for mobility and tracking your impact. This will probably be especially true in more rural communities where national surveys, including some of the sources underlying the mobility metrics, can fall short. And in addition to government administrative data, in many cases, key partners like local nonprofit service providers, businesses, and anchor institutions will have access to local data sources that can help to paint a fuller picture. And if the data do not ring true for you, we have found that there's usually a good reason based on local conditions and context. So wherever possible, metrics should be complemented with other sources of local knowledge, especially that of people with lived experience of structural racism and of poverty. So now let me stop sharing my screen so that we can go ahead back to the slides. Great. And in case you'd like to dive further into these metrics, we'd like to point out some supporting resources. We have the data used to populate the data tables for every county and city available on Urban's data catalog. The raw data are available for download. And this has an accompanying data dictionary with names and descriptions of all the variables in those data sets. And while the data tables show up to 2 years of data, this data set shares all the years of data we have dating as far back as 2014, if that's available and comparable over time. And most of our metrics do have more years of data in those CSV files, so they are worth checking out. One use of these is if you want to feed these metrics into your community's data dashboard, for example. And we at Urban also want to be as transparent as possible about how these metrics were calculated. So we are planning to make all of our programming code and interim data sets and instructions public to anyone who would like to inspect it or repurpose it for themselves. It will be on our GitHub page and linked in the data landing page once it's available. Also stay tuned for forthcoming blog posts, briefs, and other support tools that will be designed to help make these mobility metrics actionable for users on the ground. Now we want to answer just a couple of questions that have been coming in through the Q&A. Gabby Velasco will be facilitating this discussion. Welcome, Gabby.
Awesome. Thanks, Claudia. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby Velasco. I'm a policy analyst with Urban's Research to Action Lab and a member of the Upward Mobility Framework Technical Assistance Team. I'm super excited to get to share this with you all today and answer honestly, a lot of great questions we've already received. So Claudia and Tina, I'll start off with just kind of a general question that's come a few times about when the data will be updated and how much data will be available. So for instance, when the data is updated in 2024, will we still be able to see the archive of old 2023 data for comparative purposes and progress tracking? And can users download time series of this data?
Yes, so excellent question and exciting potential answer here. So we are working to build out an interactive dashboard eventually that's going to have more visual aids and offer more years of data in a more accessible format. The plan is for us to have the next year of data for the mobility metrics included in this eventual dashboard. And right now, however, we are offering more years of data going back into the past in the CSV files that are available for download on our data catalog. So outside of just the few years that we are able to visualize for you within the data tables that Claudia just walked you through. And until the next data update and until our dashboard is live, you can use those data to find your community and see more information in the meantime.
Awesome. Thanks, Tina. Another question that would be great came out a few times was if we could go back over the quality component of the metric and just get a bit more into that. And so explain again what it means if the quality is weak, marginal, and strong. And also when there is weak data, what can people do to supplement that data?
Great question. I think I mentioned that the definition of the data quality index values are directly on those data tables at the very bottom. But if a quality value is weak, it means that although the metric could be computed, technically, we have some serious concerns about how accurately it's measured for that community, and we wouldn't recommend that you use it. Instead, we recommend seeking more local data sources for that item. In some cases, we have standards where the sample size is so small that we determine to suppress that value. But these determinations were made by individuals at Urban who are well-versed in the underlying source of data and with the consultation of field experts who advised reasonable interpretations, limits, and caveats for those data. So the data quality is actually being determined by those most informed about the nuance of the data set. And in fact, their rationale for this is explained in our data documentation that will be posted on our GitHub once that's live.
Awesome. Thanks, Claudia. Next question that's come through is if there's an intention to add other races to certain measures for racial diversity. For example, regional variations across the US may result in higher populations of American Indian and Alaska Native populations, Asian populations, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander groups.
So again, fantastic question. I'm glad to see the types of questions coming through. And yes, we would love to be able to maximize the subgroup representation for all the metrics in our suite. But unfortunately, here's where we sometimes hit the limiting factor of the raw data itself. Frequently, for more detailed racial or other subgroups, those are either not captured in the first place, or they are captured in such low numbers that when you are breaking down the data, we cannot reliably construct an estimate with such a small sample size. And as Claudia stated before, that's why we really emphasize that the mobility metrics are very much a piece of a larger puzzle when it comes to getting a full and accurate picture of mobility in your community. And we strongly recommend supplementing your insights with community perspectives, local and historical data sources, and more. That being said, if you have ideas, we have that share feedback button. We would love to hear people's thoughts and reactions as they go through the data tables as we continue to update our data suite over time.
Great, thank you. Kind of related to this, building on the quality of the race and ethnicity data, one person's wondering that the race groups have a different mix of data quality in their county. So can they compare a weak value of data quality with a strong value of data quality for race and ethnic groups?
Great, I'll take that one. If the data quality of one of your groups is strong, we encourage you to go ahead and use that. But if the quality is weak, we wouldn't advise that you start making decisions based on that particular value or a comparison of those values. So we'd say to stick with comparing the values that are strong or marginal, knowing that you have some level of inaccuracies in the data, or really it's more about a wider margin of error. So hopefully that's helpful. But really, these are the flags and opportunities for you to go ahead and make use of local knowledge about context and history, especially of discrimination against marginalized groups in your community, and not only rely on those figures.
Great, thank you, Claudia. And yeah, I think disaggregation is coming up a lot, with some people also wondering if the metrics will be disaggregated by age, and also how age plays into the upward mobility framework generally.
I can take that one, Tina. Yeah, so internally, we are planning to expand our subgroups moving forward. We are a bit limited in what each separate data set allows for us to do. And in some cases, based on the construction of the metric, we might not have as many options for disaggregation by age specifically, but that is something to look forward to. And all of our updates will be posted on the data dashboard, on the data landing page for you to see. And then I think the other question was about how it factored into the framework, which is a great question. In constructing the framework, we did want all of our suite of predictors and metrics to be able to touch on all ages along the life cycle. So that was really important to us. And it's also important in terms of trying to see short-term and medium-term change.
Thanks, Claudia. And quickly building off that, also a couple folks asking if a future disaggregation is planned for gender data.
I'll have to say the same answer because it's on the list, but again, limited by the data source sometimes.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Great, yeah. Keep the questions coming in. These are really great, you guys. Oh, another cool question. Why don't we offer national estimates as a comparison and only offer the county comparisons?
I could take that one. So yeah, that's a common question we get actually. But with so much variation across the country, we believe that, a nationwide estimate can frequently like muffle the informative variation that you are going to be seeing from community to community when it comes to these metrics level insights. We found it more effective to let communities opt into selecting the comparison communities that they consider their peers, such as ones that they aspire to be more similar to, or ones that they think that they have similar local conditions or population size to benchmark their performance against. And the planning guide that's been mentioned before by both Becca and Claudia has advice on selecting comparison communities for this purpose as well.
Great, thank you. Another more specific question about one of the predictors. So one person's wondering, for the housing affordability predictor, does this include public and subsidized housing, or is it only for market rate housing?
Claudia, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not totally sure on this one off the top of my head, but for what it's worth, you can look in both the description as well as the additional notes that Claudia pointed out at the bottom of the tables themselves to see A, where the source is from, and B, what the definition is actually implying for affordable housing there. And if you do not get clarity from either of those two locations, also, when you click into the description area, you can also once more click out to what Claudia referred to earlier as the evidence resource library, which has all of the background information that we use to determine those benchmarks and definitions.
Yeah, and these are for broader housing units available in your community. But yeah, this one can be a little tricky. So we'd encourage you to go ahead and read a little bit more on the details behind this one.
Awesome, yeah, and as Tina and Claudia both said, there's a wealth of resources in the data library, so definitely recommend going there. One question that is definitely tied to the purpose of this webinar is for folks that need help deciphering their county's data, whether it's kind of interpreting it in their local context or just like understanding the numbers themselves, can they reach out to Urban for assistance?
So great question again, and one we're very familiar with, of course. As we mentioned earlier, if you're in the data tables or on the landing page and run into something confusing or off, please feel free to click that share feedback button, which we will be monitoring internally. And if you stay tuned on this webinar, our colleague, Will Engelhardt, at the end will be sharing a way to register for updates on the Upward Mobility Framework project and future opportunities down the line. So stay tuned for that.
Great, thank you. One final question is coming in, if you'll be able to provide policy recommendations and intervention examples to move these indicators. So I know later in this webinar, Joanne Nelson from Boone County will be talking a bit about how her county used this data source to develop some policy and program recommendations. But Tina, Claudia, wondering if you have any other thoughts on that generally.
So this is great because this is exactly the outcome that we want to see when people engage with this data, is people thinking about how they can digest the information and then make it actionable and turn to doing some sort of action in their community to improve upward mobility. TBD on our front, however, many resources exist already that are connected somewhat to this mobility metric suite. One that comes to mind is Results for America's Economic Mobility Catalog. And beyond that as well, the planning guide also points to many resources that you can use to determine a lot of these components yourself independently as a leader in your community.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This question's coming in about the scale of the data. So wondering if at some point Urban will be able to provide census tract level data on indicators for indicators for which estimates are available.
I'll take that one. Yeah, in some cases, we do have data that already were calculated based off of the census tract level, and we rolled them up to the county or city level. In this GitHub location that I keep talking about, we hope to be offering some other links to where you can find some tools that will help you kind of drill down with finer levels of geography. But there are some of our metrics that will not permit that. So I think in our data dashboard planning, we have some limitations there, but we won't leave you without some sort of a resource of where to go to be able to see things at a more local, granular level.
Great, thanks, Claudia. And thanks both Claudia and Tina for a really great explanation and for answering all these questions. I'll turn it over to Will Engelhardt.
We almost made it through a session without having to be reminded to unmute, but alas. So I was just saying, thank you so much, Gabby. And when we were thinking about designing this training and planning this training, we were knowing that we'd spend a lot of time going through the tools and the data table specifically, and this new and exciting tool. And it's great to see so many questions come in about the data, but also a lot of questions around how to use it in your jurisdiction, how to use it for planning, policy purposes, specific questions coming in around that. So it's great that we thought to connect with the jurisdiction that has been using the metrics and using the upward mobility framework. And so I'd like to introduce you all to Joanne Nelson from Boone County, Missouri, to talk about their work with the metrics and with the framework. Joanne is the director of Boone County's Department of Community Services and has served with this department since 2014. The mission of Boone County Community Services is to support the greatest possible level of independence and self-sufficiency of Boone County residents by promoting their physical, mental, and social well-being to cultivate a safe and healthy community. The Department of Community Services led Boone County's Upward Mobility Project, one of the 8 cohort that's been mentioned previously, which utilized results-based accountability to drive equity-centered and data-informed decisions. Initial priorities for Boone County were set during an upward mobility kickoff data walk in the summer of 2021. For the data walk, Boone County brought together a range of community members and stakeholders to review relevant mobility metrics and were asked what changes to these metrics they'd like to see over the coming years and how they could achieve these changes. The data walk was used as a strategic planning tool for the county moving forward, which Joanne will provide a lot of details on in her presentation. Please note that what Joanne will be describing took place during an earlier phase of our work, the 1.0 phase, if you will. So some of the language describing our upward mobility work might be slightly different than how we've discussed it so far today. And in fact, that's because the work that Boone County did and the 7 other counties have done has helped reshape the framework into what it is today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Joanne to talk through their work.
Thank you, Will. As Will said, my name's Joanne Nelson, and I am the director of the Boone County Community Services Department. I'm going to talk to you about how our department used the Urban Institute's mobility metrics to develop our Boone County Mobility Action Plan. You should see a link at the bottom of this slide that will show you how you can link to how we use the information and how we're currently using the information to communicate with our community. Boone County is centrally located between St. Louis and Kansas City, Missouri, with a population size of a little over 183,000 individuals. The county seat is Columbia, which also houses 2 private colleges and the University of Missouri. The city of Columbia has a population of 126,000 plus individuals, which consists of 69% of the Boone County population. Boone County is 76% white, 10% Black, 7% other race, and 4% Asian. Boone County currently has 15% of its children under the age of 18 experience some form of poverty. The Boone County Community Services Department, as Will said earlier, was established in 2014 and utilizes data to drive decision-making. We also have developed a data dashboard, which has many of the data that we mentioned that is included in our upward mobility plan. We also lead and collaborate on many cross-sector partnerships aimed at addressing equity in the community. For example, the Boone County Community Services Department led a data-driven initiative with the Pritzker Family Foundation funding with the goal to review data points that would increase kindergarten readiness through a focus on prenatal to age 3 interventions. Areas of highest need were identified using GIS mapping of home visiting service recipients, Medicaid utilization rates, and birth outcomes. Research indicated that providing support during the earliest stages of a child's development has the highest impact on their future success and well-being. Local data gathered indicated that Black women have far poorer birth outcomes in Boone County than their white peers, and these families were less likely to reach out to trust supportive services, while being the most desperately needed impacted population in the area of education, health, and mobility. These findings led to a strategic plan to increase family support systems through a continuum of home visiting services beginning at pregnancy. By the end of the planning grant, additional funding was secured with the Missouri Children's Trust Fund to implement a centralized home visiting collaborative called Brighter Beginnings, which focuses on improving birth outcomes and engagement for Black mothers through an implementation of centralized intake and referral system and a shared database for home visiting organizations. With this success of this project, one of Boone County commissioners reached out to our department and encouraged us to apply for the Urban Institute's Upwardly Mobile Business Cohort. Once we were accepted into the cohort, we started using the strategic framework provided by the Urban Institute to get us started. For this project, we used a 3-part definition of upward mobility, which encompasses not just economic success, but also looks at how people in poverty feel valued in the community, and if community members feel they have power and autonomy to make their voices heard. The mobility metrics provided by the Upward Mobility team at the Urban Institute offered an interconnected, innovative, and evidence-based approach to understanding conditions which can boost upward mobility for disenfranchised populations and communities. Building upon the holistic definition of mobility from the U.S. Partnership of Mobility from Poverty, the mobility metrics provided valid and reliable community data to guide policy, programmatic, and community level decisions. Our team reviewed the mobility metrics for Boone County and compared these to peer counties of Douglas County, Kansas, Johnson County, Iowa, and Knox County, Tennessee. The mobility metrics we used for our project included 3 drivers: strong and healthy families, supportive communities, and the opportunities to earn and learn. Since our cohort has worked on this framework, Urban has made updates. They've changed the word drivers to the 5 pillars. The strong and healthy families driver contains predictors related to financial well-being, housing, family, and health. The supportive community drivers includes data about local governance, neighborhoods, and safety. The opportunities to learn and earn driver includes metrics related to education and work domains. Upon initial review, the mobility metrics showed Boone County fares worse in several predictor categories when compared to peer counties. Specifically, higher rates of racial and ethnic segregation and poverty concentration within the county impacts several mobility predictors, including health outcome, access to transportation, crime rates, and educational outcomes and employment outcomes. As we review the data, we also used a lens of targeted universalism based on the framework developed by Dr. John Powell at the Othering and Belonging Institute at Berkeley. This takes a universal policy approach which builds in solutions for different groups to get what they need to be successful. With insights from the preliminary mobility metrics, we knew racial and equity must stand at the center of our process and objectives and goals. Our department wanted to include diverse community stakeholders with lived experience and some professional experience who will lead the process of developing the mobility action plan. Traditional efforts in Boone County had solicited feedback from communities of color through interviews, town halls, and other venues to earn buy-in or to add stories to what consensus was for an already developed plan. We wanted the process to be different. We wanted the process to be intentional and centered on voices and perspectives of the community. So we invited Black and minoritized leaders and residents and others to join at the planning table to shape the design and direction of our plan. To do this work, we utilized the results-based accountability framework based on the approach, because this approach was an equity-centered, evidence-based, action-oriented, and data-informed process. Everyone was on an equal playing field. We knew it was important to value the lived experience of those experiencing poverty with the goal of working together, utilizing this framework to increase upward mobility and economic success. The results-based accountability framework connects current and local trends and other data related to a community issue to drive work towards a common population result, followed by a set of goals and activities that will create the desired impact of a focused trend line. Data and equity are central to this framework, which was critical to this project. Results-based accountability asks participants and practitioners to use the turn the curve thinking to guide planning and activities. It is a central component of the framework. Turn the curve thinking involves asking 5 questions to create an action plan. And you'll see those 5 questions on the slide. While it's not a formal step within the results-based accountability framework, the county's engagement began with a data walk that would serve as a powerful tool to launch our community planning. To set the stage for the data walk, we reviewed the first 3 questions of the RBA Turn the Curve thinking process. How are we doing? What's the story behind the curve? Who are the partners who have a role to play in turning the curve? The example poster shown represents strong and healthy family driver with the predictor of financial well-being, and the learn and earn driver with the predictor of work. Data was gathered from a variety of resources and disaggregated when possible. The posters also included clear explanation narratives about the predictors, and they used accessible colors for those with color blindness. Data was gathered from the Urban Institute's Boosting Upward Mobility Metrics and other data sources such as the CDC, American Community Survey, Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the 13th Circuit, City of Columbia Housing Programs Division, Child Care Aware of Missouri, Central Missouri Community Action, and many other local sources. Please note that the citations were not included on these posters due to space limitations, but were included in a separate document. Here, as I said before, here are a couple posters with the strong and healthy families and the learn and earn poster. When gathering data, we saw many connections across the drivers. So we developed what was called bridges, data bridges, posters with local data to showcase the connections between the 3 drivers. One example of a data bridge poster is between the strong and healthy families and opportunities to learn and earn drivers, including family benefit utilization from SNAP, WIC, and temporary assistance for needy families programs. This showed the connections between families needing additional supports related to education and workforce issues. Other data bridge posters show the connections between supportive communities and strong and healthy families and the learn and earn and supportive community drivers. Here, now we're ready to talk about the data walk. Here's a couple of pictures we took from our data walk. There were 21 posters were separated into different areas based on the 3 drivers. Again, strong and healthy families, supportive communities, and opportunities to earn and learn. Due to COVID restrictions, we were only able to invite 40 individuals, but these individuals included elected officials, public school administrators, nonprofit social service agencies and participants, and leaders of local foundations, healthcare providers, law enforcement, and interested community members. Participants were asked what number on these posters they'd like to see change the most in the next 3 years. The last part of our meeting, participants were asked to form into groups around the area they wanted to have as a priority. The groups then voted on the priority area that they wanted to focus on. The data walk activity served as a powerful tool for launching community planning, and many of the individuals are still involved in our upward mobility project today. Here you see the initial priorities based on each of the drivers that participants wanted to focus on. When we then asked the groups to narrow down their priorities into a few work groups. So you can see the initial work groups. Okay, we're going to go into that next. Okay, out of the data walk, 3 work groups were formed. The early grade literacy focused on disparity in 3rd grade literacy scores. Fair and inclusive housing focused on improving affordable and inclusive housing. And lastly, jobs and workforce development focused on reducing opportunity gaps in the workforce. As we finalized our Urban Institute work plan, we found that there were common themes emerging from each work group. Work groups identified the need to address systemic racism and structural inequities across all aspects of the community and its system. Current plans and initiatives have been plagued by the lack of coordination, collaboration, and targeted planning among various nonprofits, organizations, and institutes. And lastly, data sharing seemed to be a challenge without outcome, purpose, and indicators to track towards achieving that purpose. Programs have either chosen their own tracking methods or have collected only limited data on program outcomes. Where we are now, the Mobility Action Plan does not sit on the shelf. We have had dedicated participants since the very beginning and wanted them to stay involved. Each work group has utilized the results-based curriculum and developed a result statements. Early grade literacy, all children in Boone County learn to read and write and see themselves as readers and writers. Fair and inclusive housing result statement is all people in Boone County have a safe, quality, and affordable housing. And the jobs and workforce development result statement states Boone County is a flourishing community where everyone can live, learn, and grow. Exciting news, we recently hired a program manager who will coordinate our upward mobility project. The manager will address some of the common themes from the data and help facilitate conversations with our community leaders and coordinate the progress of our work groups. And I welcome any questions at this time.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joanne. It was really wonderful to hear about Boone's work, and I think inspiring for everyone to hear how the data can feed into these larger county processes and plans and programs. So we've had a lot of great questions come in. The first one that I'd want to bring up is someone's asking, what are the features of the mobility metrics and the features of the upward mobility framework that felt the most novel to your team? So what did the upward mobility framework provide that you hadn't been able to find elsewhere?
I would say it provided us structure on and knowing where to go. I mean, there's so many data points out there. We just didn't know where to go. And when we found that framework and we could see the drivers and then the predictors, it allows us, it almost acted as a starting point for us in data gathering. And then knowing that maybe perhaps we could get some other more localized data by working with other groups and governmental entities in the community to pull down even as much data as we possibly could.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Another question is, what would your advice be for other communities who are interested in implementing this framework and this data?
I think you need to have, we're very lucky here in Boone County in that we have a strong collaborative group of governmental entities and strong governmental organizations who are willing to work together and to begin the process. We had strong buy-in from the very beginning when we started this, and the strong buy-in continued. But I think the most important thing that we did was we made sure that when we started this program, that we had the right people at the table, people who had lived experience, who could really tell us how to bring that plan forward. And using that results-based curriculum allowed, we were able to set the stage that all voices were equal at the table. And since we already had that established relationship with many of the organizations and government, it was a pretty easy process to bring those others with lived experience on, and they did it gladly. So
yeah, that's great to hear, and I think is something that resonated with a lot of the other county cohort members as well, especially when thinking about plan sustainability and thinking about implementing it, making sure that it's grounded in community first and foremost. Let's see, kind of a related question. What has the broader community reception to your plan been? I guess probably beyond just the data walk, but if there's been broader community reception or knowledge as well.
Well, when we finished our plan, we had a major rollout in June of 2022. We had a big press event and rolled that out. And our goal was not to have this plan sit on a shelf. And so our department tried to figure out how we can keep the groups going. And we were lucky because we had stakeholder facilitators who led each of those three groups that we're focused on, and they still wanted to be involved. And those stakeholder facilitators were, two of them were from the Minority Men's Network, who were really involved, and we were able to give them a small stipend of money to stay involved. And when it was over, they were so intrigued with what we were doing, they were willing to stay on and continue that and continue working with us. So it takes a lot of work, and quite honestly, we felt like to continue the work, we needed to hire somebody other than just staff to continue that work. So we were the county has graciously allowed us to hire a program manager because they've seen so many people who want to know about it. How can they get involved? And at first it was a smaller group. And then every time we keep meeting, the groups keep getting bigger and bigger of people who want to be involved, because we're trying to make each of those meetings actionable.
That's so great to hear. Another question focused a bit more on, I guess, the content of your plan is, what metrics or predictors for Boone County surprised you the most when you got the data from Urban? Were there any that you were looking at and you're like, wow, I didn't expect this number to be that for Boone County?
Oh gosh, I really think some of the housing information that we gathered was astonishing to me. When I remember that was probably the biggest one, is the housing under the affordable housing. I mean, I know that's a nationwide problem, but it was just how families, we really dove into in our data posters. If you pull them up on our website, you can see how the segregation and how families were forced to move to different areas. So I would say the housing, as well as the minorities referred to the juvenile justice system. We were kind of astonished by that. There were so many things out of our data walk that people wanted to work on, but we were like, okay, we can only work on 3. And so I'm hoping as we work on these and continue to work, none of these problems are going to be easy to solve, but maybe we can expand what we work on and kind of address, benefits cliff was another big one that folks really wanted to work on as well.
Awesome. Let's see. Okay, another question. This person's wondering if you could talk a bit about the biggest obstacle your team faced, both maybe using this data and also just in developing the framework and developing your mobility action plan.
Mm-hmm. One of the biggest, I would say one of the biggest obstacles was time when we developed the mobility action plan. And COVID, we were dealing with a time with COVID and trying to develop this huge community process when you can only be in rooms, with so many people and you had to be masked. That would be the biggest, problem that we ran into. And then time. And once the mobility plan was written, it allowed us to take a step back and see, okay, what are things that we still need to work on? And so those were the major obstacles I believe we ran into.
Yeah, that COVID one is definitely a really big one, and something that I know we weren't expecting when we launched the cohort, but was something that we had to adapt to very quickly. Awesome. Well, I think we got one more question in, and you've touched on this a bit with the hiring of the program manager, but a couple folks wondering what the next steps are for Boone's mobility action plan and kind of what the priorities are for getting those plans in place.
That is an exciting question, because what we're doing is, instead of us leading this movement of working on the plan, we really are trying to tie ourselves into existing groups that are already out there. And the plan had some actionable steps on it. So one exciting thing that we are finalizing this week is, out of the mobility action plan and the fair and inclusive housing work group, they wanted to do a county-wide housing study, because all the participants felt like they really didn't know what was out there in the city and the county, and there was nothing like this that had ever been done. And so our department was able to secure funding, and we are at one of the first actionable steps out of that group was we are releasing an RFP to have a housing study done that would include recommendations for housing. And they'll do interviews, focus groups with all types of groups. And we're releasing that hopefully within the next month, with a city and county leadership involvement with that.
That is so exciting. That's so exciting to hear. Well, Joanne, thank you so much again for sharing your time and expertise with us and everybody on this webinar. And I'm going to turn it over to Will Engelhardt.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Gabby. Thank you so much, Joanne. And I'm glad I unmuted this time. So I'm learning by doing here. And so just going to wrap up with a couple next steps and takeaways coming out of this session. First, just wanted to remind folks, it does look like we're going to end a couple minutes early. So if you could please take just a minute or two to complete the survey about your experience with this session at the completion. That would be greatly appreciated. It's really helpful for us to guide our work moving forward. Also, someone asked in the Q&A chat box around whether this recording would be available for folks afterwards. And yes, it will be. We'll be posting it online. The full recording and the closed captioning will all be available for folks. And then, so just moving on, I want to announce two things that we haven't actually shared yet already, which is one, hearing it here first, we will be having a virtual event in the summer coming up soon, sometime over the summer, reflecting on lessons learned broadly from the upward mobility cohort and sharing the upcoming opportunities to engage with this work. And so everyone that's registered for this will be receiving that invite when it is available, date TBD, and more information to come, but more trainings and events coming up soon. So hopefully you all can join us for that. And then several folks asked us, if you could just go to the next slide, several folks asked us about ways to get updates on this work or connect with us directly. So Tina and Claudia talked quite a bit about ways to engage directly in the data tables, but if you're interested more broadly in ways to receive potential technical assistance from us or get updates about work coming out related to this project, there is a link that is in the chat. It's also up on the screen there, and it takes you to that page that has a screenshot there where you can just register briefly with information on your name and email and organization, and then click a couple different questions around what you're interested in getting updates on, whether it's opportunities for training and technical assistance, updates on the mobility metrics, or new research blogs, briefs, etc., or trainings, or all of the above. So please do go there if you're interested and sign up. It should only take 30 seconds. And with that, I want to thank everybody for engaging. Thank you for joining. Your questions were amazing. Really appreciate people taking the poll and actively participating, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks again. Goodbye, everybody.